Greetings and felicitations, my friends. Peter here. Welcome to Star Trek Revisited once again, where I, each episode, dive into an original series episode of Star Trek and give you my likes, my dislikes, and some trivia added in too. In this episode, we're going to be exploring Season 1's episode, Court Martial, and without any further ado, let's get right into it. We begin with a thumbs up, and it's all about remastered effects in this episode where the Enterprise is orbiting Starbase 11 following damage sustained by an ion storm in which one crew member was lost. And what I really love about this remastered effect is that we get to see another starship in the background, a sister ship of the Enterprise, another Constitution-class starship, which I tried to zoom in on and get the registry and the name on the hull, but it was too blurry when I zoomed in as a shuttlecraft goes by in the distance as well. Having researched and done a little bit of searching on this, it's widely believed that this other starship is the USS Intrepid, as in the scene that follows in a moment or two, the Commodore of the Starbase, Commodore Stone, diverts repair resources from the Intrepid to the Enterprise, which is on priority 1. So I'm going to say that this is the Intrepid. Now, an interesting fact about the Intrepid is that it would crop up unseen but mentioned in a Season 2 episode where it was said to be manned or crewed entirely by Vulcans, or as we would call them right now, Vulcanians. So interesting indeed. Now, what I also like as we get closer views of the Enterprise, as we pan over, we get beautiful detail on the side of the secondary hull where we can see windows. Through those windows, we can see corridors and we can see doors to quarters and rooms and whatever, and some are blue, some are red, which we know we come to expect. I love this detail. We can see people moving on the decks inside the ship. We can see crew members. We can see a male crew member wearing a yellow shirt and another wearing a blue. And then we see a female crew member in red above a number at the bottom section of the secondary hull, 1837, or it might be I-837. Actually, that might be I, because we can see some damage here on what is the ion pod. Now, the ion pod is going to be critical to the plot of this episode. It is where a crew member will go to take readings on an ion storm, close-up readings, one would assume. I don't know if that involves them sort of coming outside of the ship slightly. But that is what that is for, and this shows us the damage that the Enterprise has sustained and one of the reasons that they are at the starbase. So, powerful start. I also really like the next scene that we get where we see the surface of the planet on which Starbase 11 is built, and we see the headquarters building, the tall building on this surface. And again, we can see people moving inside the building. We can see Starfleet officers walking around, and this is an effect we didn't get in the original versions of this, and I really, really like this indeed. So we get our first scene with people in it rather than places and ships, and two individuals here. We have Captain James T. Kirk sat in the office of the Commodore of Starbase 11, Commodore Stone. Kirk is writing with traditional pen and paper by the looks of it, his report on recent incidents, ready to provide the commanding officer, Commodore Stone. Stone is looking at Starship status board on the wall, and it looks like he's got quite a few starships at the base or scheduled at the base at the moment, because there's quite a hefty list there. And if we look closely, we can see some of the NCC registrations and status on the completion of their repairs, as Stone indeed issues a communication to the maintenance section rescheduling repairs to the Intrepid as the Enterprise is on priority 1. Not sure why the Enterprise is considered more important than the Intrepid. Perhaps it's because it is the flagship of the Federation, but at this point in time in the original series, that hadn't been officially established. So Kirk has made his written report here, but he is awaiting Mr. Spock to beam down with the computer log report from the Enterprise as well. And he chases Spock as he's not sure why there is a delay. Uhura informs Kirk that Spock should have been down there 10 minutes ago as Kirk closes the communicator and converses with Commodore Stone again, and they discuss the fact that a fine officer named Lieutenant Commander Benjamin Finney has been lost, and as part of this mission that was investigating an ion storm, and this sets the scene quite nicely. We hear a transporter beam and we cut to the transporter chamber, and Spock is beaming down, and he immediately has a look of concern, I would describe it, on his face as the Commodore challenges him for the computer log on the tape that he is bringing, and Spock tries to communicate something to Kirk first, but he doesn't get the chance. And then they are interrupted further as the door to the Commodore's office opens, and in walks a young girl who turns out to be Jamie Finney, who is the daughter of the crewman, Benjamin Finney, who is now deceased. Kirk is pleased to see Jamie, but it's clear that Jamie is not pleased to see him, and she launches into him, very, very upset, blaming him for her father's death, as Commodore Stone asks Mr. Spock to escort Miss Finney away, and Spock obliges. The Commodore then challenges Kirk. He says, "It is your sworn deposition that you didn't jettison the ion pod until you changed the alert condition on the Enterprise from yellow alert to red alert." And Kirk looks back at him confused and says, "You have my sworn deposition." "Yes, that is exactly what it is." And having examined the record tape that has been provided by Spock, Commodore Stone then communicates back, "Then I must assume that you have committed willful perjury, because this record tape from your ship's computers indicates that you jettisoned the ion pod with Commander Finney inside it before going to red alert. Consider yourself confined to the base, and a general inquiry will determine whether a court-martial is in order." And our teaser comes to an end. Opening titles proceed, and then we get our episode name, Court-Martial, with a nice shot of the Enterprise from the starboard side, orbiting the planet on which Starbase 11 is based. We get a beautiful passing shuttlecraft as well from Starbase 11. It has the registry SB11-1201/1, and as it passes the Enterprise again, near that rear section where we can still see that damaged ion pod on the side, we can see people moving about within the ship, which I really like. On the planet's surface, we cut to a social bar area where people are having drink and snacks by the looks of it, and we have a mixture of people here. Now, what I really like about this is that it's nice to see a social scene in Star Trek like this, and it's also very, very nice to see older ages present in this. Now, one of the things that I really have a problem with in newer iterations of Star Trek, and in television shows in general, is that these days there is a bit of an obsession with youth. You very rarely see older individuals here in responsible roles, and I'm very, very happy that we're seeing this mix of ages and genders and diversities in this episode, with Commodore Stone himself being a man of African-American origin. Now, into this social area come Captain Kirk and Dr. McCoy. I don't know how much time has passed, but Kirk has changed from his green wraparound tunic into his standard yellow standard issue tunic. Kirk starts saying hello to some familiar faces. He acknowledges the fact that his graduating class from Starfleet Academy is well represented, and we get some shots of some folks who, all men, of seemingly different ages. Some are a bit older than the others, and it makes me wonder why Kirk was at the Academy at the same time with some of these people. But one in particular, as we cut to the two fellas who are sat at the bar here, there's a guy in red who I believe Kirk addresses as Timothy, and the guy behind him, who I think he addresses as Mike, he looks way too old to have been in Kirk's class at the Academy, if indeed he was. Maybe I'm assuming something that isn't the case there. We can see, though, that those that Kirk identifies as having been at the Academy have have not advanced through the ranks as quickly as Kirk has. Kirk has made it to captain quicker than most in history, if not everyone. And we can see lieutenant stripes on the arms of the majority of these people sat around in this social area, as Kirk is being very, very pleasant to people he perceives as his friends, and McCoy takes a little drink in the background. Sadly, it's insinuated by people that Kirk feels he should know better of, that he is responsible for Ben Finney's death. They lay into him for saying Ben Finney was a friend of ours, and he encourages them to finish the sentence, to which his friends say, well, you... In fact, I can't remember what they actually said in response, but Kirk's ultimate realization on this is, what would be the point? And he walks off saying that they've already made up their mind that he is responsible for the death of Benjamin Finney. As he walks out, rather abruptly, he brushes past a lieutenant commander in red walking in, and a young female wearing a very elegant costume, as is often the case in Star Trek, the original series. And she looks at it, she does a double take at him, and as if she recognizes him. And McCoy spots this and goes over to her and engages in conversation with her and says, in case there was any doubt in your mind, that was indeed Captain James T. Kirk of the Enterprise. And she acknowledges and says, oh, I know that. I didn't have any doubt. And they introduce each other, and there's a lovely little scene where they've both identified to each other that they are old friends of Kirk's, and McCoy quips, all of my old friends look like doctors, all of his look like you. And she smirks a little bit and understands what he's getting at. And it's so true. Kirk seems to know a lot of ladies who are not unattractive, shall we say. And this lady is identified to us as Ariel Shaw, and we'll find out a lot more about her in coming scenes. And I really like her, actually. I like the actress who is playing her. I like her hairstyle, her costume, earrings. I think she looks really, really good here in this episode. And she's instantly quite relatable, and she's playing a good part. So next scene, and we cut back to the Commodore's office. Again, I don't know how much time has passed here, but I notice immediately that Kirk has switched back to his green wraparound tunic here, which is interesting to me. Why? One, is it a continuity error? Have they just not been paying attention and had the wrong uniform at the start for all of these scenes and not ensured continuity? Or B, is Kirk changing deliberately and has a certain amount of time passed? And if it's B, I question why Kirk would be wearing this in such an official meeting with an officer who is senior to him, because I've always perceived the green wraparound tunic to be an alternative uniform to the standard, certainly, but one that is less formal. And you can see that with the deep V-neck that is part of its design. So, minor point, but it's just very interesting to me that Kirk would choose to wear this for such an important meeting, and or take the trouble to go and specifically change into it, if that had been the case. Now, in the Commodore's office, he is sat at quite a small desk. He's got a monitor on his desk. He's got presumably some sort of tape deck computer banks, which is facing towards Kirk, on his desk as well. Now, he is dressed in red, which, again, at this point in time, could be considered unusual, because command officers normally wore gold/yellow. Again, in these early episodes, I don't think they had quite fully decided the extent of which the colours represented departments. And as you can see as well, we've talked about this before, I think specifically in Charlie X, the symbol on his left chest is different to that of the Enterprise. It is not the Delta symbol. It is something that looks like a big sunshine in this case, actually. And on his sleeve, he has the rank insignia of a Starfleet Commodore, which is different to anything we've ever seen so far. And I really like this. And I really like the guy playing Commodore Stone as well. I think he brings a presence and a gravitas, and I appreciate his inclusion in this episode. They review some of the history of Kirk's friendship with the deceased Lieutenant Commander Benjamin Finney, and they recount a tale which led to a souring of their friendship from years ago when both men were serving on a Federation starship, the USS Republic number 1371, as Kirk reads out, and an incident where Finney had been on watch. He had failed to close a switch or a circuit, and Kirk relieved him of duty, took over, noticed the mistake, corrected it, and logged it and reported Finney. Finney received a reprimand on his record and was put to the bottom of the promotion list. Finney had already delayed his space career by staying on at Starfleet Academy for an unusual amount of time before going out to space, and he felt that this had looked bad on his service record, delaying his progress up the ranks, and this incident only made things worse. And this had led to a resentment from Finney towards Kirk, which led to damaging their friendship. And it's a fact that most people who knew both men knew all too well. And we go back and forth on this, and we get to the point that really matters here, the fact that Kirk's sworn testimony of what happened in this incident, where he assigned Finney to the ion pod to take readings for this ion storm, and his account of when the storm got so dangerous to the Enterprise that he had to press the jettison pod button. And in Kirk's words, in Kirk's story, he did this only after he had signaled for the alert status to go from yellow alert to red alert. The computer records, the computer logs are contradicting that. And there's a bit of a fiery exchange comes between Stone and Kirk here, where Stone gives him an out for this. He says, we can kind of brush this under the carpet. You'll have to move sideways, take a desk job, and we'll call it stress or whatever. Kirk's having none of this, and he says, I know what happened. I'm not accepting that. And then he challenges Stone to get to the point and say, well, what are you insinuating? And it gets very nasty, saying that you're a perjurer or at best, and you're a murderer at worst. Words to that effect anyway. And Stone pleads with him one last time to take the offer and get him out of this the easy way. And Kirk, quite rightly, says, not on your life, Commodore. I intend to fight this. Stone says, then you draw a general court-martial. And we get wonderful acting here from both actors. And Kirk retorts, draw it, I demand it. And right now, Commodore Stone, right now. And the scene ends. Next scene commences, and we get another beautiful evening shot of the surface of Starbase 11. It's never named what planet this is based on. It's simply referred to as Starbase 11. And in a very, very low orbit, there is either a moon with rings or another planet that is visible. I'm going to presume that that is a moon. This is not something I recall being present in the original unremastered episode in its original form. But we cut to another scene where Kirk returns to the bar stroke dining area. He has once again changed from his green tunic to his standard issue yellow. And as a point of trivia, this would be the last time we would ever see this green wraparound tunic in season 1. He would never wear it again until season 2. And indeed, when it returns in season 2, it's a different version. It's an updated version of that garment. He has clearly been informed by Dr. McCoy that his dear old friend, or more than friend, I'm going to suggest, Ariel Shaw, is present on the starbase, and he greets her warmly, and she does the same as they sit to a table, and they look into each other's eyes. And she wants to talk about the situation that Kirk finds himself in. He doesn't want to talk about that at all. He wants to talk about something much, much nicer. And it's revealed at this point that although she's not in uniform, Ariel Shaw is actually a Starfleet lieutenant who is in the legal department, presumably what would come to be referred to more commonly in later iterations of Star Trek as the Judge Advocate General's office. And she encourages Kirk to get the best possible defense for his upcoming court-martial, which they're waiting for, as has been stated in the captain's log that we heard at the beginning of this act or scene. And she then relays to him that the prosecution will base their case on Kirk versus computer. And she goes on to say that in order to beat this, he's going to need the absolute best lawyer. Kirk then says, I would like you to do it. Can you do it? And she says, no, I'm busy. And he presses harder and says, surely someone as capable as you can do 2 cases at once. But she kind of dodges the question, for now at least, and says that she's recommending Samuel T. Cogley, attorney at law. He will be expecting your call. She's already briefed this individual about Kirk's case. And then Kirk probes a little further and says, hang on a minute, though, how do you know so much about what the prosecution will base their case on? And she says, because, Jim Kirk, my dear old love, I am the prosecution, and I've got to try my very, very best to see you disgraced and dishonored. And it's a very uncomfortable scene for both of them. And she's not happy about it, you can tell, but this reminds me very much, and we're going forward here, but it reminds me very, very much of the Star Trek Next Generation Season 2 episode, The Measure of a Man, where we get a similar situation where Will Riker does not want to take the assignment as prosecutor, but he's told that there will be summary judgment in favor of the prosecution if he refuses to do so. So I imagine something similar has happened here with Ariel Shaw. In any event, we cut to the next scene where Kirk enters his quarters on Starbase 11, where he is living while he's confined to the base. And there's an aging man sat in his quarters. He's got a lot of character. He's got a crusty old face, which just smells of experience. This guy's cool. I really like him. And there are books, legal books, all around the place. And Kirk enters his room and is surprised to see this individual there. And this guy says, "You Kirk?" And Kirk says something along the lines of, "Sorry if I'm overcrowding you." And he says, "Well, I figured we'd be spending some time together, so I thought we'd move in." And he goes on to elaborate about his love of books. And he goes over to the small computer in the corner of the room and says, "Everything in the universe can be stored on this, but it's words to the effect of soulless. And I don't trust it. Books are where all the history and all the personality and all the character of the universe are stored." And he's a very, very interesting character indeed. And as this exchange sort of completes, Kirk says to him something along the lines again of, "You're either an insane crackpot who's escaped from some sort of mental institution, or you're Samuel T. Cogley, attorney at law." And Cogley acknowledges him, and they shake hands warmly, and he says, "Guilty on both charges." And we're moving at pace here. We're moving quite quickly. And we're in the courtroom now, where we get a bell on a desk, and ding, 3 rings of this bell, which is a protocol that we will become very familiar with throughout Star Trek, as we see many incidents of this nature in upcoming episodes very, very soon in the original series, in fact, not far from now. And as we pan out, we can see that Commodore Stone is leading a 4-man panel of judges for Kirk's court-martial. And the scene is set, and there is a court recorder or a clerk who is down just below the bench, ready to put tapes into a computer bank for witnesses who will be called. And it should be noted here that this is the first time in Star Trek, the original series, that we see full dress uniforms. Technically not the very first, because I neglected to mention in the bar scene earlier on, we did see some individuals wearing these. In fact, some of the individuals next to Commodore Stone, who are Space Command Representative Lindstrom and Captains Chandra and one other name who I cannot recall just yet, they might have been there wearing those already. So we've got a Space Command representative and we've got Starship captains. And I'm going to presume that the Starship captains are the ones in yellow, but because that would be typical. But again, who knows for sure. We pan out even further and we see the prosecution and defense desks. We see Ariel Shaw, who is also now in uniform, in a very nice female version of the full dress uniform. And a point of trivia, this is the only time we ever see a female full dress uniform in the original series. We've seen versions of these full dress uniforms in Star Trek Strange New Worlds in recent times, and they are quite accurate to this design, but the female characters who wear them in that case, like number 1, for example, aren't wearing the dress stroke skirt version that Ariel Shaw is donning here. They're wearing the male equivalent. So this is a bit of a unique episode in that regard. Kirk enters a plea of not guilty, and we get about the business. Miss Shaw calls her first witness. We see a panel of witnesses waiting in the back of the courtroom, which consists of Mr. Spock, also in full dress uniform, the Enterprise's personnel officer, who is not in dress uniform for some reason, and then Dr. McCoy, also in dress uniform. There is a gap of one seat, and at the end of the row is Jamie Finney, who has an obvious interest in these proceedings. Spock is the first witness called, and I really, really like his testimony. Before we get to his testimony, his record and his current assignment and his commendations are read out, one of which is the Vulcanian Scientific Legion of Honor. Vulcania is mentioned a couple of times in this episode. Earlier on in the bar scene, Kirk had commented to one of his old Academy friends that he hadn't seen him since the Vulcanian expedition. And we get cracking Spock. Spock's testimony here is excellent as Shaw asks him some questions, and Spock cuts her off when she is relaying the evidence from her perspective and what she perceives to be the facts. And Spock says, however, the computer is in error. And she says, why is that? Because it states that the pod was jettisoned before the ship went to red alert. And she probes and asks, how does he know this? He says, because I know the captain. I know him. It is not in his nature. She challenges this, but he interrupts. He is steadfast in his opinion here. And it's very, very nice to see. And this is not loyalty. I mean, Spock is very loyal to Kirk. There is no doubt of that. However, this is more than loyalty. This is trust. This is logic. This is just logic to Spock. And he gives the example that if a hammer is dropped on a planet with a positive gravity, he does not need to see it fall to know that it has hit the ground. And again, we get another Vulcanian reference here. He says, I am half Vulcanian. It is not in my nature to assume or conjecture or words to that effect. These witness cross-examinations are all very brief by the prosecution, and as Shaw ends this first one, Mr. Cogley is given his chance to cross-examine. He says no questions. They move on to the Enterprise's personnel officer, where she is challenged on the records of every person on the Enterprise, which she has access to as personnel officer, what we would probably now call an HR person. I wonder if in modern Trek there are still HR people on board. Interesting. The long and short of this is she knows the records of everyone on board. She must have a hell of a memory. And on the captain's, James T. Kirk's records, there was the incident that we spoke of earlier where Kirk had relieved Finney and discovered the error, and Finney's career was affected as a result. And she noted that the officer's name at the time was Ensign James T. Kirk. And all the while, Kirk is very aware of Jamie's presence behind him. He gives her a darting glance as the proceedings are going on. And the personnel officer, again, it's clear that she has a loyalty to Kirk. And this definitely speaks to Kirk's character and the fact that his crew, if they don't like him, which I'm going to assume most of them do, then they at least deeply respect and trust him. And that is clear as she walks away from the stand. She looks over to Kirk with an apologetic gesture on her face, as if to say, I didn't want to do that, but I had to. And Kirk, of course, understands this. McCoy is next to be called to the stand, and he looks really chilled here, actually. He looks possibly the most relaxed and unanimated of all the witnesses that have been called so far, as again, just noting that Cogley is still not cross-examined. And Miss Shaw's line of questioning here is along the lines of, would it not be natural for Kirk to resent Finney if he had come to know of Finney's hatred of him? And McCoy says, not Captain Kirk. He's not that kind of a man, but as is quite often the case in court situations, with the letter of the law to be what is entered into evidence, she said, is it theoretically possible? And McCoy, again, quite relaxed, says, yes, it is. The witness is excused. Mr. Cogley, again, does not take his opportunity to question. Commodore Stone at this point intervenes and asks why, and Cogley says, I've been waiting for this preliminary business to get out of the way. I want to call Captain Kirk to the stand. And this we do. We get Kirk sitting in the chair, and Kirk places his hand on the chair to be identified. and start reading out his service record, his current assignment, and then we start going through his commendations, and it's a hell of a list. We have the Palm Leaf of Axanar Peace Mission. Now, this is something that Axanar is quite big in the wider non-canon Star Trek world, but it was mentioned one more time in Star Trek, the original series, in an episode we've referenced fairly recently as well, actually in the previous episode, I believe, Whom Gods Destroy, Season 3. It is referenced in that very episode. Funny how that is the case, how so close that we referenced that episode. But anyway, Palm Leaf of Axanar Peace Mission. Axanar, by the way, is a fan series, if you've not heard of it, which has caused all sorts of trouble, for lack of a better word, among the fan production community. That would be a whole other video, and you can find out all about that by looking at it on YouTube. More commendations. It's great to have the subtitle options on these online versions of Star Trek, actually, that are very easily accessible, because I'd never read these all out before, and I never quite heard them correctly. So we've got the Grand Kite Order of Tactics, Class of Excellence, Fronteras Ribbon of Commendation. At this point, Shaw is, may it please the court, she doesn't see it necessary to portray Kirk as the hero here and have this all read out. And she politely says the prosecution concedes the inestimable record of Captain Kirk. Cogley's having none of this. He wants it read out for the record. And it continues. Awards of Valor, Medal of Honor, Silver Palm with Cluster, Starfleet Citation for Conspicuous Gallantry, Farragut Order of Heroism. And then Cogley says, I think that's enough. Who knows how much longer it would have gone on, as Shaw gives Cogley a bit of a passive-aggressive thank you, and we can move on. Cogley then asks Kirk to go over what actually happened in the incident during the Ion Storm, and Kirk beautifully recites this calmly, efficiently from his memory, saying that this was not the first time in his long career where he had been tested. He had been trained for this, and this exact sort of incident over many, many years of experience. And this, to me, diverts my mind to a recent episode of Strange New Worlds again, which you may or may not have watched. If you haven't, please close your ears for a few seconds. But if you have, you'll likely understand what I'm about to say in the episode where the version of Kirk in that episode does not convey the impression that he is being trained and is experienced in these sort of decisions. So interesting. And we'll get to that in due course. We'll eventually make it to Strange New Worlds. But he relays a detailed account of what went on the bridge, how he did not panic. He remembers clearly what he did, and he took all the right steps at all the right moments. And he took the action to jettison the pod with Finney in it to protect his ship. His ship was at risk if he didn't take that action, the science of which is never really explained. And nothing is more important than my ship, says Kirk. Cogley hands the floor to Miss Shaw, your witness, Miss Shaw, and she comes in with what will prove to be some very, very damning evidence. She has the visual recordings of the Enterprise log, the CCTV, if you like, from that stardate 2945.7, and she relays what you're about to see is what actually took place during the Ion Storm. And on the screen, we see a very clear video of the Enterprise bridge with the crew, and we can hear every word that they say. Now, in an episode that's upcoming, in fact, the very next one to this, we get a query about did such visual records exist on starships at a period of time earlier to this, and it was explicitly stated that no, that was not the case. So clearly that has changed in recent years, and now we can. And as we get to the next episode, I'll touch on that again, and you'll understand what I'm referring to in a bit more detail. On the bridge, though, who have we got? We've got Kirk in the command chair. We've got Lieutenant Brent in yellow at navigation. We've got the first of two appearances of Lieutenant Hanson at the helm. At the engineering station, I don't think that's Leslie, and I don't think that's him entering the bridge either. We've got Spock at science and Uhura at communications. Spock relays the fact that this is an Ion Storm, and Kirk says we'll need a duty officer to go to the ion pod to take some readings. And it's revealed that Mr. Finney is top of the duty roster, which is a point that is very convenient to me. And we'll talk about a bit later when we get to the end and all is revealed what's going on here. Anyhow, our court is watching on, and we can see as they go to warp factor 1 and towards the ion storm, Finney has acknowledged the signal to go to the ion pod. Kirk presses a button on his command chair to go to yellow alert. Now, this, to my knowledge, is the only time we've ever had a close-up of the buttons on Kirk's command chair. And we've got yellow alert, we've got red alert, and we've got jettison pod, and we've got 2 unnamed buttons, or presumably these are customizable. But there you go. We get a call from the pod. Finney here, Captain. Ion readings in progress, and Kirk relays, make it fast, Ben, I may have to go to red alert. This signifying that if he goes to red alert, he will have to jettison the pod. That is what is understood from this situation. Things start to escalate. The storm gets more violent, and Kirk calls to engineering to get 1/3 more thrust, and then he calls to the ion pod again and says, stand by to get out of there, Ben, and we hear him respond, aye, aye, sir. And then, damningly, we see Kirk press the jettison pod button on his chair. The alert status is still clearly flashing yellow alert, not red alert. Back in the courtroom, Kirk looks in astonishment. Cogley looks on in astonishment. I think everyone, even Shaw herself, even having seen this evidence in her heart, in her mind, I think she still even believes that somehow Kirk is innocent. She's doing her job, but I still think she doesn't believe what she's seeing. But she has to do her job. And as she relays this to the board of judges, clearly stating what the record tapes show, a confused Kirk mutters to himself, but that's not the way it happens, as we cut to the end of the scene. Next, we're back in Kirk's quarters. Cogley is sat down, chewing on his pen, looking pensive. Kirk is pensively pacing, and we get a captain's log where he relays that the evidence presented from the Enterprise's visual log was damning, and he suspects that even his own lawyer is starting to doubt his innocence. And indeed, I think there is an element of that clearly comes into play, as Cogley says to him, perhaps you did have a memory lapse. I suggest you consider changing your plea. I could get you off. And Kirk briefly starts to doubt himself, but then he remembers what he clearly recalls, and he's certain. And here he relays again, I spent my whole life training for decisions just like that one, which again ties into that Strange New Worlds comment that I made a few moments ago, which is deeply irritating. And he's steadfast here. He is not going to take this lightly. He gets a call from the Enterprise. He talks to Spock, who has been checking and rechecking the computer. Kirk, rather cynically and in a defeatist manner, says, I'll tell you what you found, Spock. Nothing, right? And Spock says, Captain, you sound rather defeated. And Kirk then makes a little quip, saying, look on the bright side, Mr. Spock. At least you might be able to beat your next captain at chess. And Spock's eyebrows are definitely triggered here, and we hear him say, chess. And he stands up and leaves the bridge. Interesting. Now, what happens next is even more interesting, because into the room comes Jamie Finney, who acts toward Kirk in completely the opposite manner than she did earlier on in the episode. She now realizes that she was in error, and she no longer blames Jim for the death of her father. And Cogley picks up on this immediately. He definitely is puzzled by this. Kirk is just happy that she doesn't blame him anymore, and that she knows that he's not responsible. It's particularly interesting at this point because she has just witnessed that damning evidence. So what else has happened to make her change her mind? If anything, her belief that Kirk was responsible should have been reinforced. And anyway, they prepare to go back to court and face the music, although at this point in time they have nothing more that they can offer. We cut to the Enterprise. Spock is in the rec room playing three-dimensional chess. In walks McCoy with a astonished look on his face, and he relays to Spock, well, I had to see it to believe it. Captain's about to lose everything, and you're sat here playing chess. And Spock says, indeed, I've just won my 4th game. And he shows McCoy, and McCoy reacts appropriately astonished and saying, that's impossible. And Spock confirms this. Yes, the best I should have been able to achieve was a draw. This including the fact that Spock relays that he programmed the computer for chess himself months ago, proves that there is something wrong with the computer. The computer cannot be trusted. And we'll come back to this in a little bit. We're back at the courtroom, and the defense rests their case, as does the prosecution. Cogley reluctantly rests his case, but seconds later, as a verdict is about to be pronounced and no doubt a sentence delivered, in walks Spock and McCoy, who have changed into their dress uniforms again. They whisper into the ears of Cogley and Kirk, and there are objections from all around. Cogley says some new evidence has come to light. Ariel Shaw protests, saying the defense have rested, and Cogley then goes into a wonderful speech relating the fact that accused human beings are entitled to face their accusers, and there is a witness that has not been called. Shaw disputes this, saying the appropriate witnesses were presented and had the chance to be cross-examined. All but one, says Cogley, the Enterprise computer. And there's some initial, well, almost laughter at this, thought that the computer can be considered a witness. And Cogley then beautifully explains the fact that if you deny me and my client this opportunity for Kirk to confront his main accuser, the Enterprise computer, then you are elevating that computer above the human being. And he says he not only requests that we adjourn these proceedings and reconvene aboard the Enterprise, but he also demands it. I demand it! And it's beautifully acted by the actor playing Cogley here. And I really appreciate this. Now, after a brief consideration, this is granted by the panel, and we see the Enterprise in orbit of Starbase 11 again, and our judging panel, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, the court recorder, Cogley and Shaw are in the briefing room, and the chess set is there as well, and Spock relays that the best he should have been able to achieve was a draw, and it's demonstrated through this that the computer, which should be infallible, should not be able to make such a mistake, has clearly been tampered with. And Cogley goes on to postulate a theory that perhaps in the event of an ion storm, and in the natural course of the after effects of that ion storm, when the pod has been jettisoned, a phase 1 search is a standard procedure to ensure that the occupant of the pod is nowhere on the ship, and they can verify that this individual was in fact jettisoned and can't be on board any longer. And this presumes that such an individual would want to be found, and everyone goes along with this. Even Kirk doesn't seem to know where Cogley is going with this line of questioning. It finally twigs on Kirk when Cogley says to him, and if somebody wanted to evade such a search and knew the ship well enough, could they do it? And Kirk's eyes light up, and he says, possibly. And then Cogley drops his bombshell, and he says to the board, I submit to you that Lieutenant Commander Ben Finney is not dead. And we cut very quickly to the bridge, where the whole court panel has reconvened on the bridge. Everyone is there. We have got Hansen at the helm. We've got Brent at navigation. Uhura is at her station as well. And it's revealed that the plan here is to detect life forms on the ship by ruling them out with a device which can detect all of the heartbeats on the ship. And to do this, to achieve this, they will have to give themselves the bestest and fastest chance of accurately doing it by beaming the majority of the crew of the Enterprise down to Starbase 11 and leaving basically the court participants in place. Cogley says he has an errand to run on shore as well, important to the outcome of this trial. Stone reluctantly agrees to let him go. Now, all the while, something that I noticed about this, which all seemed a bit strange to me, is that all through this process, Kirk has been still under suspicion, still suspended from duty, and yet from this scene where they're back on the Enterprise, it's played out and acted out as if Kirk is in command of the Enterprise, which he actually shouldn't be. But he acts with an air of authority, which everyone accepts. Now, I can understand Spock and the crew accepting this because they have that loyalty to him, but everyone else, that just came across a little weird to me. that he still has this air of command. But maybe that's just his natural way about him. So we proceed with this plan, and we are shown this device, which basically is an old microphone, which is converted to look like this prop to eliminate the heartbeats. And Spock turns this on. We can hear the heartbeats all around the ship, and gradually McCoy starts eliminating them one by one by going to each person. And he finally gets to himself, and then we can hear 2 heartbeats left. And Kirk says, that should be it, apart from everyone in the transporter room. Mr. Spock, eliminate the transporter chief's heartbeat, which he does. And there's 1 heartbeat left. And Stone gets up and very, very appropriately and effectively says, Finney. Kirk says to Spock, narrow that down. And Spock says, B deck, in or near engineering. Stone goes to Kirk and says, so Finney is alive. Kirk says, so it would seem. Kirk then, again, assuming command, even though he has not been cleared of all charges, says, Commodore, I would appreciate if everyone remained on the bridge. This is my problem. This, to me, is a bad decision. But it plays out. And Kirk, again, a suspect in a potentially a murder or at best a manslaughter case, arms himself with a phaser. So, yeah, weird to me. But he goes off looking for Finney, and he's near the engineering section, and he shouts out, Finney! And meanwhile on the bridge, Spock has assumed command. He's in the captain's chair. And with the small crew that's on board, it's revealed that maintaining the orbit will be a tricky thing, and they will need to compensate for variances. And at this point, this happens. The orbit is beginning to decay, and Hansen has to make compensations. Kirk enters main engineering, and then a few seconds later, we hear the voice of Finney. Hello, Captain. And this is not the sound of a man who sounds particularly right of mind. And Kirk continues to search for him. Unfortunately, Finney manages to surprise him and put a phaser on his back. And it's relayed that Finney does indeed, well, he's not only alive and here in the flesh, but as was projected and suspected, he did indeed all that time hold Kirk responsible for his plight of never being promoted. He says the Enterprise should have been mine. Captains all, officers all except Finney, and his one mistake. And it's interesting to me, though, getting back to some earlier points, it's interesting to me that Finney has harbored this so internally all these years, and now it's being let out. How long must he have been planning this? How long must he have waited for ion storms when he was at the top of the list? Or maybe he put himself at the top of the list? Who knows? I'm really interested in the details of how and when Finney expected to be able to execute this plan, or when this happened. Did he just react? Did he go to the pod? And after all these years, did he just snap while in there and think, this is my chance to finally get back at Kirk? Who knows? But we can conjecture. And Finney gloats that he's killed the Enterprise, the ship that should have been his. He's tied into the main power, and he's made sure that it will spiral and burn up in the atmosphere. And Kirk says, does everyone deserve to die? To which Finney seems to indicate yes. And he says, well, what about Jamie, your daughter? She's on board right now. And this is the errand that Sam Cogley has gone to the surface to complete. He's gone to bring Jamie Finney to the Enterprise. And Finney reacts very, very negatively to this. And Kirk sees his opportunity and tries to disarm Finney. And a fight ensues. And they struggle. And Finney seems to get the upper hand for a while. And as I pause on some of the wider shots of this little tussle, we can see that the stunt doubles here are, as ever in the original series, not very like who they're meant to be playing. It is extremely obvious that this is not William Shatner and the actor playing Finney, but we'll let them go with that. Somehow, as ever, Kirk's shirt gets torn again. He loves getting that shirt ripped. And ultimately, Kirk gets the better of Finney. He defeats him, disarms him fully, and begging and sobbing in a narration, as Kirk relays, in the form of a log, I guess. He says that Finney told him where he had overridden the controls for the ship, and he goes to a Jeffries tube, and he starts unplugging these tubes that are plugged in and wired in such a way that will result in a very unpleasant ending for the Enterprise and all aboard her. Up on the bridge, as each tube is pulled out, there are shockwaves, and the crew and the guests from the court react as this happens. Spock is at navigation next to Hansen at this point, and once everything is restored, power is back, control is back, Spock goes to the command chair. Uhura, which I love, instinctively goes to navigation and takes over, proving once again how effective she is. She's the super generalist of the Enterprise bridge. She can do her own job, but she can do a number of other jobs as well. They stabilize the Enterprise. Orbit is steady again when the crisis is over. Stone goes over to Lieutenant Shaw and says, unless there are any objections, I propose that these proceedings are ended and all charges dropped. And a delighted Ariel Shaw, who clearly never wanted to be in this role in the first place, says, absolutely no objections, sir. And we cut to our final scene. And on the bridge of the Enterprise, Shaw is still there. Normal service is resumed. Crew is back. Shaw is the only member of the court party who is still there, still in her full dress uniform. And she's talking with Kirk by the turbo elevator. And they have an exchange. They wonder to each other when they might see each other again now after the previous gap, which was relayed to be 4 years. And Kirk says, well, not meaning to sound like a mystic, but that depends upon the stars. And he delivers that line so beautiful. What a Lothario he is. What a guy. And cheeky little Ariel here, she says, do you think the crew of a starship would notice if a lowly lieutenant kissed a starship captain on the bridge of the Enterprise? And surprisingly, Kirk says, let's try and find out. And they do. They share a kiss, and they look around, and Kirk says, see, no reaction, nothing changes. A starship crew is trained not to notice these things. And off she goes. She blows him a kiss as she enters the turbo elevator, and the doors close, and we never ever see her again. Which is often the case with women in Kirk's life. They're a bit like Bond girls in that regard. Kirk goes to his command chair, a book in hand, actually. I should have relayed that point, actually. I was so excited about the more physical exchange between those two characters that I forgot to mention that Shaw had brought a book from Samuel Cogley as a gift. Nothing special, not a first edition, just a book. And Kirk had wondered why Cogley had not given it to himself. And he says he's busy on a case. He's defending Ben Finney. He says he'll win. And Kirk laughs and says, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. And you know what? Kirk's reaction to this is beautiful as well, because it's clear that Kirk bears Finney, his old friend, no malice. And I think you can see in Kirk's reaction that he actually wants Ben Finney to win that case. He wants Samuel Cogley to win that case for him, and hopes that his old friend will recover and be okay. And that is the measure of the man that Kirk is. And he sits in his command chair, Spock to one side, McCoy at the other, and he says to them, she's a very good lawyer. And they react in an odd way. I think Spock says, yes, she is. And I think McCoy says, it seems so. Always to that effect. And they act like they're a little bit jealous, in a way, of Kirk's exchange with the lovely departing lady. But it's quite amusing anyway. As we get to the end of the episode, which was directed by Star Trek veteran director by now, Mark Daniels, easily one of the most tenured Star Trek directors at this point, having directed several episodes in season 1 and 2, and one episode in season 3. And we see the Enterprise leaving orbit in a beautiful remastered shot. We see the co-stars for this episode. We see Percy Rodriguez, interestingly identified in the credits as Portmaster Stone, which is a really cool title. I've never heard of him referred to that as before. And the many times I've watched this episode, I've never noticed that he was called that in the titles. Elisha Cook as Cogley, and we've got Joan Marshall as Ariel Shaw. Then we get the rest of the cast. We've got Richard Webb as Finney, Hagen Beggs as helmsman, not Hansen specifically, Winston DeLugo as Timothy, and Alice Rawlings as Jamie Finney. We've also got Nancy Wong as the personnel officer, Bart Conrad as Krasnovsky, William Meader as board officer, Reginald Lal Singh as board officer. The music in this episode was by original composer Alexander Courage. Let's take a look in more detail at some of those guest stars. Percy Rodriguez here, wonderful actor here, a symbol of intelligence, leadership, and moral strength in his various 60s and 70s roles. African-Canadian actor, rose in Hollywood stature during the late 60s following a couple of earlier Broadway appearances. The serenely handsome, distinguished-looking actor with a great description of him, couldn't have put it better, but he became notable for helping to break racial barriers on television and went to become a voice of great distinction behind the camera as well. Born in 1918, died in 2007 at the age of 89. Elisha Cook Jr., born 1903, died in 1995. Although this pint-sized actor started out in films often in innocuous college student roles in the mid-1930s, playing alongside the likes of a pretty Gloria Stewart or a young pre-Oz Judy Garland. Casting directors was soon enough discover his flair for portraying intense, neurotic, or spineless double dealers. Brilliant. Then we've got Joan Marshall, who was born in 1931 and sadly died quite early in 1992 at the age of 61. She attended St. Clement's School, looking far more mature than her age would indicate when she was just 14. She auditioned for and was hired as a showgirl at Chicago's Chez Paris, that is, one of the country's foremost nightclubs in the 1940s and 50s. Then we've got Richard Webb, who played Finney, born 1915, died 1993 at the age of 77, and he was an actor known for Out of the Past, Sullivan's Travels, and Captain Midnight. Finally, let's get to scoring this episode. IMDb gives this a 7.4 out of 10. And I marked this up a little bit. I don't think this is quite a 9, as I've been giving some very high scores lately for Conscience of the King and Galileo 7. I did think almost I would give this a 9, but there was a couple of things that stuck out for me here. I was particularly curious and slightly bothered by the fact of how long has Finney been planning this, and how did he execute this? This was really a chance encounter, so how could he have really planned it? And then B, the whole reprogramming the computer to make Kirk look responsible. I find it very strange that the only byproduct of that would be that the chess program would be broken. That's a little bit weird to me. And equally, Finney, an accomplished records officer, would have been more accomplished at that, and he would have not have made that mistake. Saying that, however, his state of mind might come into play. So with all that considered, I'm going to give this episode a solid 8, and I think it's well deserved. Another one done, my friends, and I love that episode, I really do. It's one that I've always really enjoyed in season 1, and something I've not mentioned yet, actually. Season 1, out of all the 3 seasons, unusually for many people, it's in many ways it's my least favourite. Controversial, I know, but as we get closer to season 3, I've got a real soft spot for a lot of season 3 episodes. But anyway, I digress. But I really enjoyed this. I hope you did too. Give me a like and a comment with your views as well. Please hit the subscribe button also. I'd be so grateful to you if you did that. And let's leave it there. I'll be back with another episode very, very soon, which will be the Menagerie Part 1. I'm going to do that 2-parter in 2 parts. So watch out for that very, very soon. And I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, well, you all take care. Stay safe, travel well, and above all else, live well and prosper. Bye-bye.